Hey everybody, and welcome to the long-awaited second part of my over-the-board tournament guide. So a couple of months ago, as some of you probably saw, I released a video that was sort of an overview of over-the-board chess, where I talked about stuff like how to register for a tournament, how to find chess clubs in your area, how to become a United States Chess Federation or International Chess Federation member, and I sort of talked about all these annoying, nitpicky things that you need to know in order to play your first over-the-board chess tournament because, over-the-board chess is coming back. A lot of people who learn chess online are interested in playing over-the-board chess, but are totally understandably a little bit worried about not knowing the procedure or simply not knowing how to register. So, if you didn't watch that first video, I normally don't do this, but go ahead and watch that because I think these videos should be watched in sequence because in this video, I will be giving you the insider's look into everything that you should know in order to actually play an over-the-board tournament. So I'm assuming that you've watched the first video and you have essentially registered for an over-the-board tournament. You've made a membership. You've become a USCF member. You come to the actual tournament that's held in some hotel or convention center, but you know nothing about how a tournament actually functions. And mainly, I know that a lot of people are worried about not knowing over-the-board etiquette. What is it actually like to play an over-the-board game? What are the rules? What do you have to know in order to sort of not make a fool of yourself? And in this video, I'm going to try to share as much as I can in order to make you completely comfortable playing an over-the-board tournament. And hopefully by the end of it, you're going to feel like a pro. And any fear that you may have of misbehaving or doing something that the pros don't do will hopefully vanish. Now, I want to warn you, this is going to be a really rambly video. I have a sheet here that has all of the information that I want to talk about. So I'm just going to let myself ramble. All right. And when I get to the part about actually playing and sitting in front of the board, I'm going to tilt my camera down. I've never done this before, so please forgive any technical issues. And hopefully you'll find something useful in all of the rambling. Okay, so once again, let's say that you watched the first video, you have chosen a tournament. The tournament's held at the Hilton Hotel in some city. You come to the hotel, everything is good. Your name is on the registration lists. What happens? So I'm going to kind of walk you through a hypothetical day at a tournament, and it starts with you coming in the morning. Let's say you've looked up on the website. The first round is at 11 a.m. Now, it's always a good idea to come to the tournament hall early. If you're staying at the same hotel where the tournament is held, make sure you're coming down before the first round, 15, 20 minutes earlier, just to make sure that your name is on the registration list, just to make sure you know where the tournament is going to be held, and just to verify that everything is fine. So generally in American tournaments, the pairings, by which I mean the sheet of paper that tells you who you're going to be playing next, in the vast majority of cases, that is going to be a sheet that is up on the wall on the side of the tournament hall that you're playing in. And you're going to see that everybody's going to be clustered around the pairing sheet. Some tournaments, and this has been more common lately, have online pairings. So there will be, on the tournament website, there will be a link to a website or to a subsection of the website that will have the pairings, and you can check that in advance of the round, and that's going to contain a digitized version of what you're going to see on the wall. But you're always going to see the pairing sheet on the wall. What does the pairing sheet look like? How do you decipher? So this is a pretty impromptu video, so everything I've prepared, I've kind of done by hand. So what a pairing sheet will look like very approximately is something like this, and I've just handwritten this just now. So you're going to have you're going to see the board number, you're going to see the player who has the white pieces, and that's going to be labeled last name, rating, and the player with the black pieces, last name, rating. That's all that you need to know. So all you need to do is you need to find your last name, you need to find the board number, very important, and you need to find the color that you're playing with. And again, that's going to be easily labeled. You don't need to worry about that. And then you have to find your board number in the tournament hall and sit down behind the appropriate pieces. You might be wondering whether that's hard. It's not hard. You're going to see all the board numbers labeled. The tournament hall might be pretty big, If at any point you get lost, you're not sure where your board number is, what you always want to do is ask a tournament director or a TD. The vast majority of tournaments, big and small, have uniformed tournament directors, or worst comes to worst, you can go to the people at the registration desk, whoever you can find, tournament organizer. It's, in my experience, if you're not sure where you're playing, it's much better to just ask. There's no shame in that, even as a GM. In new tournaments, I sometimes don't know where to go or where my section is. So by all means, that's why tournament directors are there. Do not hesitate to ask them to help you find your board, for example. So I'm going to very quickly pan out to a new scene here and show you what a tournament hall normally looks like. And I did that in the previous video, but I've just searched. The World Open is the largest open tournament in the U.S. held every year in Philadelphia. And you can see here what a tournament hall normally looks like. These are maybe not the best photos, but you can kind of see there's rows. And the boards are normally with COVID, they're a little bit more spaced out now, but you kind of get the point. It's a large tournament hall, and you'll have board number labels on all of the boards. This is maybe a more realistic portrayal. Okay, so you found your board, you sit down. What happens then? Well, first of all, you got to make sure that you grab a score sheet, and score sheets should be available at the front of the room. A score sheet is what you essentially keep notation on, and in all USCF rated events, all official events, you have to keep notation. Right? You have to write down the moves. Unfortunately, I don't have an actual score sheet handy, but I'll use a sheet of paper as a stand-in and sort of show you what you normally have to do. And this is where I'm going to pan the camera down. So you're not gonna see me, but you're going to see a chessboard and a clock, and I'll basically imitate a score sheet. So let me do that right now. And you're gonna watch me probably drop the camera or something to that effect. So I hope this works, or I'll have to re-record the whole thing. All right, let's tilt this camera down just so you can see. Well, you can see my mouse. That's great. And I think you can see the board. I think this is good. Yeah. All right. So let me make sure actually that you can see the clock as well. You can see part of the clock. See the score sheet. Okay, I think I know what I need to do. See, this is the actual fun part of the video. All right, there we go. This is better, I think. There we go. This is great. So you'll have to not see me for a little while. I hope you'll live. All right, so you come to the board now. At this point, I want to make it very clear that most tournaments in the U.S. Do not provide boards. This is actually very important. So what I would do if I were you and you want to play over-the-board tournaments regularly, I would go on Amazon and get yourself a tournament set and get yourself a nice chess clock. I would highly recommend the clock that I have here. This is called the DGT North America clock. It's very customizable. It's easy to use. And it's durable, and it's not too expensive. A tournament set, you can get a nice set of weighted plastic pieces for about 30 bucks. And I think this clock costs about 50 bucks. I'll have all the links down in the description below, so don't worry about writing any of it down. I'll make sure to provide some Amazon links or links to the official website of these things. But make sure to get yourself a tournament set of pieces and a clock and bring that to tournaments. Normally, the website of the tournament is going to tell you whether clocks and boards are provided, but in about 90% of cases, unless it's a sort of invitational tournament or some special small event, it's not provided. And when in doubt, you want to make sure that you bring this stuff. I've been in tournaments where neither player has a board, and then you got to find a tournament director or borrow someone's set. It takes all the fun out of the tournament. Okay, so this wooden set is not representative of what you normally see in tournaments. This is just the set that I'm currently using. So you come to the board. Let's say that this is a score sheet. A score sheet is going to be smaller, and it's very, very self-explanatory. You should have an extra pen or pencil, whatever you want to use. A score sheet is going to have a sort of top header that has, white, black, name of the tournament. You want to fill all that in. You don't have to fill all that in. What you actually only have to do is fill out the moves. And then it's going to have sort of a section, and it's going to have numbered moves. And it's going to have a space for white's move and black's move. This is absolutely not how it actually looks. So you will have to set the clock, if boards and clocks are not provided, to the time control that is announced on the website, and it will be announced again before the start of the round. If you get yourself a DGT North America clock, and I promise they did not sponsor me. This is, just what I think the best clock in my experience. On the back of it, you have all of the settings, and there's a manual set. So let's say for the sake of this video that the time control in the tournament that you are playing in, let's make it very simple. Let's say it's just an hour and a half for the whole game. And that's not a very common time control. Sometimes you have 2 hours for the whole game. There's also something called increment. You might, if you watch some of the top tournaments, you might hear that word thrown around. An increment just means a certain amount of time that is added after a move is executed. And this clock does allow you to set increment. So I'm just going to show you here. 2 is the manual set. Looks like I need to change the batteries. And then that second thing is the increment. So if there's a 5-second increment, what happens is, I didn't set one for black, but it doesn't matter. You press start the clock, and when you make a move and you press the clock, 5 seconds are added to your clock. Normally you have a 30-second increment. Press. Okay. Let me reset the clock to an hour 30 with no increment. I hope the clock doesn't die while I'm making the video. That would be just my luck. Now, this is a little bit obscure, but the player who has the black pieces generally gets to choose which side the clock is on. Obviously, if you're right-handed, it's more convenient to have the clock on your right side, so you can press it with your right hand. But if you are playing black, you are allowed to move the clock between right and left side. I don't think this is a formal rule, but it is generally accepted among chess players. Black has the choice of where to put the clock. Let's just put the clock on the right side for the sake of this video. And let's say that, your name is John Smith and you've got the white pieces. You adjust the pieces neatly before the start of the game. You can touch the pieces, do whatever you want before the clocks are started. Before the first round, the tournament director generally makes some announcements, what the time control is, maybe announces some of the top players in the open section, and then you will always hear the signal, please start your clocks. Do never start your opponent's clock or your own clock, I'll explain that in a second, until that announcement has been made. Okay, and once the announcement is made, if your opponent is not there yet, all right, if your opponent is there, you shake hands. Of course, again, in COVID times, normally that looks like a fist bump or no handshake at all. And black starts white's clock. Since white moved first, black presses the play button. And as you can see, the clock has started to tick. The game has begun. Now, very importantly, the rule is that you have to make a move on the board and press the clock and then write it down. It used to be the case that you could write down the move first and then execute it. Some people like to do that. In Scholastic tournaments, there would be a lot of peeking. Sometimes, my opponent would I used to do this. I used to write the move down before I played it, and sometimes my opponent would try to peek at my score sheet to get advance notice of what I'm about to play. Now things have been simplified. You aren't allowed to do that anymore. So the actual way that you move, different people have different way of moving. I tend to move just like this. Pawn to e4. You want to make sure that you leave the pieces neatly in the center of the square so that you don't have to keep adjusting it. If you do need to adjust a piece, I'll get to that. And you press the clock, and you write down the move, e4. You can see me writing it down there. Put the pen down. It's your opponent's turn. Now, if your opponent has not shown up to the board, and this is not going to happen too often, every tournament has its own rules about how much time has to elapse before the game is awarded to you as a forfeit, okay? So what you don't want to do, you don't want to stop the clock, you don't want to panic. Generally, most commonly, that amount of time is an hour. So you have to wait an entire hour, and when that hour has passed, you are allowed to stop the clock. Generally, there will be a tournament director who watches this unfold and who is aware that there's a game where an opponent hasn't shown up. And there are some tournaments that have like a 30-minute policy. You will sometimes even have a zero tolerance policy where you have to arrive on time or else you'll be forfeited, but generally those are more official tournaments. So let's say that amount of time is an hour. Let's say your opponent comes to the board, you shake hands, and your opponent makes a move, right? Okay, so that is how the game proceeds. Once your opponent makes a move, you write it down, and then you start thinking. Now, a couple of things. First of all, 99.9% of USCF official tournaments, rated tournaments, are touch move. That means something very simple. If you touch a move without saying adjust, you must move it. Okay, so if I touch a knight, I have to move this knight, no other knight, and no other piece. What I can do is this. Let's say I wanted to play knight f3. I haven't released my hand yet. I am allowed to retract that move and move this very same knight to a different square. Okay, I can do this. What I cannot do is this. Let's say we're my move. I go like this, I release my hand, and I put my knight back. When your hand releases the piece, not when you press the clock, when your hand releases the piece, the move is made, you must press the clock. This is sometimes misunderstood, but as long as your hand remains on the piece, you can move the piece back to its initial square and choose a different move, but with that very same piece. So touch move, it's a very simple rule. Now, if your opponent has put a piece inaccurately or not in the center of the square, you are allowed only on your move to adjust yours or your opponent's pieces. It is acceptable to adjust your opponent's pieces. You want to make sure that you're doing this within reason. You don't want to be obnoxious. You don't want to adjust stuff that's almost in the center of the square. You want to use this as sparingly as possible in order not to disrupt the flow of the game. But if you want to adjust something, you say adjust, not adjust loudly, but you whisper it, adjust. And you can adjust your opponent's piece, or you can adjust your own piece. Technically, if you want to adjust more than one piece on one turn, you would want to say adjust several times. That rarely happens, though. You normally just want to adjust one piece. Adjust, adjust. And people are not going to nitpick. If you say adjust too quietly, you're rarely going to get a dispute, but you want to make sure you're saying it. If your opponent touches a piece and it's a blunder, let's say we have some random position, and let's say moving the queen is a blunder, your opponent touches the queen and then releases it, he clearly didn't say adjust, and then tries to move another piece. What do you do in the event that a dispute like this arises? What you want to do is stop the clock. You are allowed to stop the clock only under two conditions. A, you are resigning. I'll get to that later. B, you are calling a tournament director. If you believe that your opponent has violated the rules, you do not want to engage with your opponent. This is a very common mistake. You try to start talking to your opponent during the game. You agitate other players who are playing around you. You want minimal contact with your opponent during the game. So if your opponent has violated the rules, you pause the clock, you raise your hand. All right, I'm raising my hand. And you wait until a tournament director comes. You explain the situation. And obviously, you cannot be guaranteed a positive resolution. Now, as I'm describing this, please understand that disputes like this are incredibly rare. I, in my chess career, have had maybe one, maybe two moments when I called over the tournament director. In adult tournaments, people mostly play honorably. You will rarely see somebody touch a piece and not move it. That kind of stuff is exceedingly rare. But I want to make sure that I'm explaining stuff just in case people have background worries, right? You never want to... I think this is true of anything. If you have that background fear, it's going to limit the amount of fun that you're having. So I want to make sure I'm covering all the bases. So that's what you do in case of a dispute. That's what touch move is. Let me check my sheet to see what else I want to talk about. Okay, so the other thing. You do not say check. So let's bring Black's king to c6 so you can see it. I think that this is a product of Hollywood and scholastic tournaments, but it is not customary. You know, grandmasters do not say check when they give a check. So if you're giving a check with a bishop, you simply make it like any other move. You press the clock. All right. I've never said check. It's not that anybody is going to dislike you if you say check, but it's absolutely unnecessary, and it is assumed that your opponent can tell when they are in check. So this is a very commonly asked question, and the answer is no, you should not announce check when you've delivered a check. Now, what about checkmate? Let's say that, obviously this is a pure hypothetical. Black is a king on c6, and let's say you're moving the queen to b5 with checkmate. How do you deliver checkmate? You make it like any other move. You play queen b5, and in this case, I would press the clock and then quietly say checkmate and extend your hand to your opponent, or fist bump. Again, your opponent is probably going to oblige. It's going to be immediately clear whether it is checkmate. So that's there. You know, the procedure for delivering mate doesn't really matter. Okay, so other rules about playing etiquette, that kind of stuff. So no hands on the board. That's just to mean that you should only, your hands on the board should only be to adjust or move pieces. All right, I understand that some people who've learned chess online, you can't draw arrows on the board, and visualization might be harder. That's just something that has to be acquired with more practice. But you know, you don't want to touch squares, you don't want to touch pieces, you don't want your hand in the vicinity of the board unless you are actually making a move. All right, same with the clock, that kind of stuff, you don't want to tinker with it. Whatever, you know, whether you fidget with already captured pieces, a lot of grandmasters do that. Whether you fidget with your pen, I usually do that. That's totally up to you. But you want to make sure that you're not disrupting the flow of the game. Okay, to offer a draw. So let's say you wish to offer a draw. The proper procedure to offer a draw is the following. Let's say you want to offer an early draw. So what you would do is you make a move, and as you're making the move, I guess it would be your move, as you're making the move, you look up at your opponent, you say, I offer a draw. You could also say draw or offer draw. There's no formal, this is what you have to say. I usually say, I offer a draw, and you press the clock. What is important here? It is very important to offer a draw as you're making a move so that your opponent can contemplate that draw on their move. What you do not want to do is offer a draw while it's your turn. If you do that, your opponent may legally ask you to make a move and may still accept the draw after you make that move. Okay, obviously one could come up with devil's advocate edge cases. What if one player offers a draw as they are giving checkmate? Okay, that kind of stuff is never going to arise and is to be resolved by a tournament director. But you don't want to do anything to troll your opponent. You want to only offer a draw if you mean to offer it. Okay, so to offer a draw, as you're making a move, you say, I offer a draw, and you press the clock. To accept a draw, all you have to do is stop the clock and fist bump, shake hands, whatever. To decline a draw, you do not have to say anything. If your opponent has offered a draw, you're playing with the black pieces, you wish to decline it, you can simply make a move and press the clock. That means that already implies that you're declining the draw. If you want to be polite, this is what I try to do. Unless the draw offer is really obnoxious, like my opponent's offering a draw in a lost position, I will say something like, I would like to play on, or I wish to continue, or let's play on. Any of those phrases are a perfectly acceptable way to signal to your opponent that you've heard the offer, but that you wish to play on. All right, no further talk is necessary. You don't have to share your evaluation of the position. The less you say, the better. But to be polite, it's totally acceptable to say, let's continue, or I wish to play on. I'd like to play on, that kind of stuff. Okay, now this is not a fun part of the video, but I've got this question a lot. How does one resign? Okay, so the old-fashioned way of resigning is putting your king down. That's still totally viable. You can do that. There's no rule against that. But the way that most grandmasters, most top players, most professionals resign in the modern day is simply to stop the clock and to fist bump or to extend your hand to your opponent. Okay, that signals that you are resigning. That is a very foolproof way. Stopping the clock in general, unless you are stopping the clock to raise a dispute, it essentially means that you are admitting that the game is over and you're resigning the game. So if you want to resign like Magnus Carlsen does, he does not resign often, but when he does, Magnus would stop the clock and extend his hand. But if you want to be old-fashioned, you can put your king out, put your king down. You could also just extend your hand straight away without stopping the clock, but I prefer to stop the clock to signal to my opponent that the game is over. Okay, what else have I written here? Beverages. Yeah, so you may have beverages at the board. Do not put your coffee cup on the board. Obviously, exercise common sense. You can put it, a little bit away from the board. You can have coffee, obviously nothing alcoholic, soda, whatever. You can also have light food items. That is totally allowed, unless it's some special tournament and it's been forbidden. So read the rules on the website. But generally, I like to bring a granola bar, a chocolate bar, something to keep yourself going if you have a long game. Again, regular etiquette applies. Don't be obnoxious. It's better not to slurp. Try to be discreet. What I tend to do if I brought a banana or granola bar is to eat it. I get up from the board and eat it a good distance away from my opponent. That brings me to another point. Yes, you are allowed to get up from the board. And yes, technically you can get up on your turn. You can get up on your opponent's turn. But to go to the bathroom, that's another thing that you should do before the first round. You should find where the nearest bathroom is so you don't have to waste any time looking. But the best way is you make a move, you press the clock, you get up to go to the bathroom. You can also get up to watch other games in progress, that kind of stuff. There's no prohibition. There's no limit to the amount of times you can get up. And again, you want to get up discreetly, making as little noise as possible. But beverages are allowed, and light food items are allowed. I once played next to somebody who brought sushi, and it was of the particularly smelly variety. I think it was eel. Let's just say that individual was not very well liked by people sitting around his board. So make sure you're exercising common sense and good judgment, deciding what food to bring. Okay, castling. Yeah, so castling is done normally. What you want to make sure you're doing is that you are touching your king first. You're putting it here. and you'll bring the rook around. Do not touch the rook first. If you touch the rook first, yes, your opponent can force you to move the rook. This is very important for older players. I think particularly a lot of older Russian players, they tend to move the rook first. I don't really know why, but I think even Anatoly Karpov, former world champion, had an incident like this where he moved the rook first. Make sure you're moving the king and moving the rook away. The other thing is that you want to do everything with one hand if possible, all right? Technically, what's prohibited is moving with one hand and then pressing the clock with the other. Not that you would necessarily do that, but you want to make sure you're doing everything with one hand. That simplifies the process, all right? If you want to castle with two hands, sometimes in a blitz game, you can do this. But what you do not want to do is have one hand moving, the other hand pressing the clock. That looks weird. I'm not sure that there's an actual rule against it, but it is highly frowned upon. Make sure that you are moving with one hand. There's no move that you need two hands for, all right? So that's just an etiquette thing. All right, what else do I have? Decline draw, we talked about resigning. We talked about castling, beverages, getting up. Yeah, so I have flag fall. That's easy to explain. And then threefold repetition. Okay, so let's say your opponent is lost on time. All right, one very important thing. There are tournaments that have a sudden death time control and tournaments that do not. A sudden death time control just means that a certain amount of time is added after a certain move number is played. For example, it's usually move 30 or move 40. Some clocks, if the sudden death time control move has been made, they will go down to 0 before adding the additional 30 moves. Make sure that you're well acquainted with what number move you're at, and that's why it's so important to keep notation carefully, and the type of clock that you have. All right, you don't want to call flag if your opponent hasn't actually lost on time. But if your opponent has lost on time, it's going to show zeros. It is your responsibility and yours alone to indicate that your opponent has lost on time. What you want to do is you want to look over and say time, and your opponent will most likely acknowledge it. If they do not acknowledge it, then you stop the clock and you call the TD. But again, that's not going to happen. It's pretty rare to lose on time, but it does happen. So to indicate that your opponent has lost on time, you whisper time and handshake, the game is over. Threefold repetition. This is actually important. I think this is very commonly misunderstood, even by very good and very experienced players. So, as some of you probably know, if a position repeats 3 times, the same position has to repeat 3 times in order for one side to be able to claim a draw. Now, let's say that you wish to claim 3-time repetition, and I won't go into the actual sort of intricacies of the rule itself. I'm going to assume that you know what threefold repetition is. Now, let's say that you've repeated blah, 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 and you look at your score sheet, you can inspect, and you say, wait a second, if I move my bishop to e3, then the position will be repeated 3 times. It doesn't matter how it was reached. It has to be just the same position. And let's say that a draw wins you the tournament, so you're feeling happy, and you play bishop e3, and then you press the clock, and then you say threefold repetition, and you put your hand out. Your opponent does not have to shake it, nor does he have to acknowledge that a threefold repetition has occurred. So must do is if you have determined that a certain move causes threefold repetition, do not make the move. What you have to do is you have to write it down clearly on your score sheet, stop the clock, and call the tournament director over, at which point you have to show the tournament director on your score sheet that the same position has been reached 3 times. Now, normally your opponent won't dispute it, but if he does, you want to make sure that you've kept notation carefully, and then you want to show the tournament director the move you're about to play and tell him that it reaches threefold repetition, all right? At which point the TD will generally take your score sheet and look over it and verify, or if it's a particularly controversial case, he might lead you and your opponent over to another board where you actually make the moves out on the board and verify that the repetition has occurred. That's happened to me. But at no time, never do you actually want to make that move on the board and press the clock, or make the move and stop the clock. When a move is made, you have forfeited your right to claim that repetition has occurred. A lot of painful losses have been inflicted this way. So, to summarize, threefold repetition, do not make the move, write it down, stop the clock, call the tournament director. Okay, so that's about all I have in terms of the game itself. Now, when the game ends, on your score sheet, there will generally be options for white 1 or black 1. You want to circle it. It's very customary to sign the score sheet. You want to sign your own score sheet. And what you'll often see is your opponent will be handing you their score sheet. You'll be handing your opponent yours. And you will sign your name, the appropriate column if you're a black, where it gives the black name. Signing your score sheet basically says that, yes, you agree that the game had the result that it did. Okay, it's all customary. You don't have to sign the score sheet. That's not a rule, but it's good custom to do so. At that point, you want to get up, and in most tournaments, it is your responsibility to mark the result. Now, if you're new to chess, you've not played over-the-board chess, this is particularly important because a lot of anguish is caused this way. Remember that pairing sheet in the tournament hall, that is generally also the official results sheet. So you want to come up to that sheet and indicate the result. Let's go back to our pairing sheet from earlier, which of course I have summarily misplaced. There it is. Let's say that you are Carlsen and you're playing Curry. Steph Curry is higher rated than Magnus Carlsen. And Carlsen has 1. What do? You put 1 where your name is and 0 where your opponent's name is. You will see where other people have marked it. You can, sometimes it's before the name, sometimes it's after. If a draw was made, it's in the game between Smith and Jones. You just put half-half. Very importantly, this generally will not happen, but even if your opponent has told you that they will mark the result, you still want to come up and verify because yes, sometimes by mistake, the result is marked the wrong way, and it is your responsibility to make sure that the result is marked the right way. And in most cases, unless you're playing a tournament in Europe, you generally submit your score sheets to the TD and they mark the result. But even in Europe, when in doubt, go up to the pairing sheet and make sure that the result is correctly marked. And that's about it. The last thing I was going to talk about here is claiming prizes. I think we finished with everything over the board, so I can tilt the camera back up and we can make process either. Go. All right. I think we're good. Oh, let me just tilt it up just a little bit more. All right, I think this is good. Okay. So last technical thing, claiming prizes. So if you have won a monetary prize, after the tournament, there is generally, that evening, there is a tournament director that writes checks, or there is, they will announce how to claim your prize. Sometimes they mail it out and you have to give your address. Whatever it is, the tournament director at the start of a round will announce how to collect your prizes. Don't worry about that. But sometimes you'll have to provide your information. If you have to leave a tournament before the prize collection, what you should do is you should always alert the tournament director, give them your home address, and generally a check will be mailed to you in due time. But don't worry about it. That kind of stuff happens pretty reliably in American tournaments. You will get your prize if you have won one. And that's basically all I was going to talk about now. I'm sure that there's a lot of stuff that I missed. And for this video specifically, I will be reading the comments very carefully. So if you have questions, please leave them in the comments. I will do my very best to answer them. But I hope that this incredibly rambly, amateurish video did help assuage your fears to some extent about playing over the board chess. And I hope I was able to explain some of these thorny moments and things that perhaps were dissuading you from trying your hand at over the board chess, which I think everybody should. Now, most importantly, is just to exercise common sense, to look around at how others are doing it. And if you behave well, you do stuff that you would do in real life, you're generally not going to attract any negative attention at the tournament. And when in doubt, ask the tournament director, use Google, and use the comment section. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I will put the links to the tournament set and the clock that I recommend in the description. And I wish you the very best of luck in your over-the-board chess career. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.